Excellent. Thank you very much. Before we do a formal really welcome, I'd like to welcome you all to this virtual Cabinet meeting for December. Present at the meeting are a number of Cabinet members and a number of Council officers, and if they enter into debates, they will tell you who they are for the purposes of the video to make sure everyone knows. And before the meeting starts, can I please ask everyone to turn off their meeting chat functions before the public questions item in order to try and avoid any distractions that may take place. I'm just going to get to that part. Can also everyone present to turn their mobile phones to silence. There's nothing worse than a vibrating phone whilst we're trying to hear someone talking on the meeting. And can refer you to the published protocols for holding virtual meetings with particular notes for a few items. So can members of the Cabinet, should they please ensure they have their videos on at all times? But can you put microphones on mute unless speaking? With the rollout in Harrow starting this week, it has given people hope for 2021. But this is not a time to lower our guard. We must ensure we follow the Public Health England guidance of hands, face and space. In Harrow, we've seen a rapid rise in COVID-19 cases over the past 2 weeks, which are now growing exponentially. The deteriorating situation is why we and the rest of London were moved into Tier 3 before the scheduled review dates. People may have seen today the Minister's announcements where further areas are being moved into Tier 3 from tomorrow night. Failing to tackle this serious situation would lead to a rapid escalation of hospital admissions, which could threaten to overwhelm the NHS into the new year and beyond. We've also seen a rise in fatalities in Harrow, and we need to do all we can to keep that under control. Item 8 on the agenda is setting out how the Council will be responding to tackle the rise in infections to keep our residents safe. So due to the severity of the situation, I propose that we move item 8 to be heard after item 2 on the agenda tonight. Is that agreed? As you not agreed. We now move to.
Sorry, Peter, can I just make 2 points? One, I'm not sure actually putting the public questions back is a good idea, but it's obviously down to you as chairman. But more importantly, can someone give Anjana Patel a call? She's having trouble connecting to this meeting.
Yes, your points to be noted, Paul, but we do face a very situation, and we have Christmas and New Year coming along quite quickly, and our infection rate is moving so quickly now that we need to people need to understand what the council is trying to do. So item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Varsha Palmer. I think everyone else is on the call this evening. Declarations of interest, item 2. The declarations of disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests from members of the Cabinet have been published and are on the published on the website. Can I have any declarations from other members present in the virtual meeting, if any need to be declared? I don't see any hands up, so I would take that as none known at present. If any become notifiable during the meeting, could you please let me know and we can record it at that time. We now move to item 8, which is the COVID-19 update. There has been a publication on the council website with the information, and it is going to be presented by Sean Harris as the Chief Executive and Carol Furlong, who is our Public Health Director of Public Health. So, Sean, would you like to introduce the report?
I will do, Chair. Andre's just going to put the presentation up, and Charlie Stewart's also going to cover part of the presentation as well.
Also, yes, so thank you.
I think Andre's just about to put the presentation up.
Excellent, thank you, Andre.
So thank you, Cabinet members and guests. This presentation covers the position in relation to COVID-19 since the last Cabinet meeting in November. We're going to cover the situation in Harrow, what the implications are of Harrow and London going into Tier 3, and we're also going to pick up a number of key issues in relation to the Council's response, and also to outline what you said at the beginning, Chair, about the important progress in relation to preparing for the vaccine. And we're also going to pick up a number of formal decisions which the Council's having to take on a very urgent basis as a result of the growing emergency. So in terms of the overall picture, I will hand over to Carol very shortly, who will go into the detailed position in relation to Harrow shortly. But essentially, I think as people will know, the position in London and Harrow is escalating rapidly, with Public Health England identifying that London is in a position where the spread of the coronavirus is exponential in the community. We have actually a very similar position in London overall at around 300 cases per 100,000, and with just slightly higher in Harrow. And Carol will go through that information in a bit more detail, but that's doubled in almost a week. So it's a very, very rapidly moving and escalating situation. And obviously that's beginning to turn into increased pressures in terms of hospital admissions and pressures on the NHS. And we're going to talk to you about the approach that the Council is taking along with other London boroughs to respond to these key issues, because it requires a coordinated and extensive response in excess of what the Council and other London boroughs have been doing to date. But I'll hand over at this point to Carol just to run through some of the numbers to give people a more detailed overview of the situation.
Thanks, Sean. We're facing a crisis with coronavirus in Harrow. I produced this data this morning based on the latest data that Public Health England had sent to us, and I've actually got an update on the numbers. So as of this morning, it was 302.6 cases per 100,000 people in Harrow. It's the highest rate that we've ever seen. As of this evening, that has since gone up to 331.3 per 100,000. The number of cases in the last 7 days was 760 and has now gone up to 832. And we're expecting it to rise because the interim data is showing that we've got an even bigger increasing trend. The incidence in people over 60, which is a concern because they are most likely to be affected seriously by COVID and end up in hospital, was 156.9 yesterday, and has gone up to 238 today, which is a really big rise, and that's really concerning. We go on to the next slide, please. The more people than ever before are having a test in Harrow, our test positivity, which shows that how much the higher it is, it shows that there's more disease in the community. But the pictures that I've got here, these two graphs, the top one shows the pandemic as it started, and you can see that green line, which is the 7-day rolling average, is really going up, and we would call that an exponential rise. It's rising incredibly fast. The bottom graph shows you a bit of close-up about what's been happening in the last 6 weeks or so, and or maybe a little bit longer. And the orange bars at the end are the interim data as of yesterday. Today's data showed that we had 187 cases in our interim data. The only way that those data can go is up. They won't come down. So we're looking at an even bigger increase over the coming days. So far we've had a trebling of cases since the 27th of November, and with the doubling rate is increasing on a daily basis. So we're expecting that by Christmas we will have as bad a problem as they've ever had in the northwest of England, which we were all seeing a few months ago. So we do need to pay attention to all of those messages about wearing a mask, washing your hands and keeping your distance, and not mixing households. So if there's one thing that we can do, is we can all take that responsibility to not mix our households and do what we can to avoid spreading the virus and break that chain of infection. Pass back to Sean.
Thank you, Carol. That's very, very sobering information, and clearly something that a pattern which is manifesting itself across London and across much of the southeast of England. So, as Cabinet will know, the Council has played a very significant role in COVID-19 since March, and that is increasing week on week. I think what we are now entering is probably the most intense period of activity that the Council will face as a result of the move to Tier 3, and perhaps more importantly, the Council's response to that in concert with the rest of boroughs across London. So in terms of what's happened in relation to the move to Tier 3, it is a very significant move and requires a significant increase in council activity and action. We've been asked sub-regionally and locally to develop a detailed action plan in order to be able to, as Carol said, play our part along with local people in breaking the chain of infection and starting to get the cases down over the next few weeks. And I think it's clear from the evidence from the rest of the country, it will take a number of weeks, if not months, to reverse the rapid rise that we've faced over the past week to 10 days. What has happened, and I'll pass over to Charlie Stewart to go through this in a bit more detail. The council has been asked to pull together, this happened last weekend, along with all other London boroughs, a Tier 3 action plan. And that involves a range of activities which Charlie will go through, which are effectively all about identifying people who are positive for COVID, ensuring that they take the action in terms of self-isolating, and therefore breaking the chain of transmission across the community. And there are a number of things that we need to do to identify people with COVID through testing, but then also to promote a series of key messages for local people in order that that can take place. Myself, the leader of the council, and Carol took place in a community webinar earlier this week in order to be able to get those messages across. And I'll come back at the end about what some of the broader implications for the council are of this, but I'll hand over to Charlie now in order to be able to go through the detail of our action plan.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Charlie Stewart, Corporate Director for Resources and the lead for the Silver team. The Silver team is the operational team in the council which does the operational response on the council's behalf of a C9 team. So I'll just quickly take you through these slides. There are quite a few of them. I won't go into much depth on them, but if there are any questions, of course, please take them at the end. I'm not quite sure whether I have control. No, I do not. Sean, could you move on to the next slide, please? Okay, hopefully now I now have control. Thank you for that. So the plan is, as Sean says, to break the chain of infection. A lot of this we were already doing, but we need to maximise our efforts. This slide outlines all the different activities that we will be doing. First of all is the support to the vaccination, the NHS rollout of the vaccination and the site provision, etc. That is ongoing work which has started, and I'm glad to see that vaccinations have started in the borough. The next two about maximising the amount of testing that's going on, both for those that have symptoms, which of course been happening for a while now, and bringing in, as Sean says, the new test for those that are not showing symptoms at this moment in time. We then, I'll skip to the one after that, need to extend our contact tracing. Of course, most of that is done by central government, but we do have a key role to play here, and we can increase the amount of people that are contacted. We're going to extend that to contacting the contacts of those that have tested positive. We'll also be extended to support to enforcement. We of course have a lot of people on the ground at the moment doing enforcement, working with the police. We'll extend support to that as well to help people understand the rules, the guidance, and ensure that they carry them out. And then in the end, the wraparound is a massive increase in communications and community engagement to ensure that all this is rolled out to people. So this slide just shows you the current situation regarding testing for those that have symptoms, and we need to maximise that. And we have asked for additional test facilities, but the priority at the moment has been given to North East London. However, we are hopeful for early next year that that will increase. Secondly, we need to bring in the new type of testing, which is very fast for those that are not showing symptoms, which was rolled out very successfully in Liverpool. It's a new kind of test. It's not quite as effective as that test for those that do have symptoms, but it augments it, and it's very important in our arsenal of things that we can do to break the chain. That test strategy is a 6-week-long programme, which will be starting the 6-week-long programme, that is starting in the new year. However, we're already building our capacity here under the direction of Carol and to focus on certain areas. But in the new year, we'll be building that capacity rapidly to undertake tests in the community, across the community, and also to focus on particular areas such as business. A tiered approach with main sites supported by smaller sites, perhaps in halls or in libraries, etc. Mobile trailers, which we will be moving to different areas of the borough, and rapid reaction that we can literally move on a day's notice to hotspots where it is needing direct entertainment. Funding is available from central government, and we are currently in the discussions about that, but we have been accepted to go ahead with this plan. Before Christmas then, as part of the building up, before we start the 6 weeks, we'll be opening the first main site, hopefully in the H&M building next Monday, and the priority for that will be business and then the general community. And we have got a booking system which we will be opening up fairly shortly. We'll also be introducing one semi-mobile trailer to test out that type of operation before we can introduce more in the new year. So we'll be starting by testing staff at the depot so we can get that right, and hopefully general testing on another site for residents of the borough. After January, then we start to build that up. We're no longer going to be doing schools testing because that will be done by the government. However, we'll be supporting that with advice and guidance, etc. And we'll also be setting up the rapid reaction so that we can get, as I say, to the hotspots. As far as enforcement is concerned, we've already started recruitment, and we have applications for additional COVID marshals who will help support the enforcement we currently have in place by doing those sorts of things that are noted here, encouraging the residents to take the right guidelines, ensure they are following them. They'll be working in the hotspots again, and we may well be redeploying our own staff next year to also aid that. As far as communication is concerned, a whole range of different activities which are kind of listed here, basically extending not just communications but engagement with the community and community leaders, which is critically important because they are better placed to spread the message and get people to understand not just the situation but the response that's necessary to break this chain than we are. So that's the range of activities that we have already kicked off and will be accelerating in next year. And back to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Charlie. So this slide just summarises just some of the wider impacts that having to upgrade all of our work on COVID has. It is a significant organisational ask and something that we will obviously be focusing on, which will have an impact on other priorities within the council. I think I want to just also mention that obviously the position in relation to the vaccine has got more positive this week. The first vaccine has been approved. The first vaccinations are not imminent in Harrow. They actually have taken place this week at the primary care network delivery site at the Hive, and there are also further major vaccination sites planned elsewhere in the borough. We anticipate that one of those may come into delivery early in the new year, subject to the availability of the vaccine, and we're also hopeful that in January there'll also be care home and vaccinations for care home staff and residents and other vulnerable groups who are at home, hopefully early in the new year. And the current plans is for hopefully thousands of people to be vaccinated weekly, probably from the middle to the end of January to April. It is that clearly that has the most impact in terms of ultimately being able to get through the pandemic and onto a much stronger footing in relation to dealing with coronavirus, hopefully by the second half of next year. You will have seen that there's an awful lot of activity that has taken place, pretty much none of which existed less than a week ago. And I do want to pay tribute to staff across the council who have worked round the clock since last Saturday when they were asked to pull together this plan. We are in a position now to operationalise a plan and even begin to deliver some of that before Christmas, but then ramp that up probably for at least a 2-month period from the beginning of January till the end of February in order to be able to deliver what we need to do in terms of breaking the chain of transmission. There is a formal annex that has been circulated, but essentially there are a series of decisions that we're asking the Cabinet to make in relation to a whole range of issues relating to establishing the testing centre, dealing with the winter grant, taking forward local contact tracing, recruitment in relation to additional staffing, and also making sure that we put in place the procurement in order for us to be able to deliver the additional 100,000 plus asymptomatic tests over the next few weeks. Chair, that was a relatively rapid canter through everything that the council is doing and has been doing over the last few weeks, and in particular over the last week. I think it's important to emphasise that COVID-19 continues to dominate all aspects of the council's activity, And again, I just want to pay tribute to staff at all levels and in all services, both for keeping those services going, but also for the very significant additional work that coronavirus is bringing. It is very sobering that, as with the rest of London and the South East, the situation has deteriorated very significantly since the last update to Cabinet. We should expect the situation to continue to deteriorate for a period of time before these new measures have an impact, could be several weeks. Obviously, that's been responded to from government from a tier 3 perspective, but also the council's been asked to put in place, as is highlighted in the presentation, a significant number of additional activity in order to be able to drive down the number of cases in the borough over the next few weeks. And obviously we will bring a further report to the Cabinet in January, when hopefully we'll be in a position to have implemented much of the plan that's set out tonight, and hopefully we'll start to see a reduction in the number of cases in the next few weeks. But I think it is fair to say that we are probably in for a very, very difficult period of weeks, both with the rising cases, the normal winter pressures on the NHS, and the fact that the organisation has been dealing with a global pandemic pretty much on a 7-day-a-week basis for the last 10 months. But hopefully that will give the Cabinet and residents of Harrow a clear update about what the position is, what the national response is, and what the local response is. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. Before I comment, is there any questions or comments that people would like to make? Can't see any hands at the moment, but people are waving, so I weren't really sure. I do have a genuine comment to make. I did start off by thanking the staff at the beginning, but I will say that when you look at the through that presentation, we are in a very serious situation in Harrow, and as Carol said, those figures that were used are the ones from 5 days ago, and they're escalating very quickly. So the prevalence of COVID in Harrow is much higher than 320 odd that we were talking about previously, and we're probably near a lot much higher, and those figures will be coming out next week of where we really are. But it's a point that Sean made towards the end of the presentation about resilience within the organisation as a council, and having to focus on responding to the COVID pandemic as a priority, which means that some services may be reduced over the coming weeks to be able to deal with all the work that has to be undertaken. This is normally sort of when people are taking time off to be with families and friends, and and people are tired, and so it is causing a major concern in Harrow, and I think it'll cross London and across the country. So if people could be a bit, it's a hard thing to say, but I just think sometimes we've got to be able to sort of understand that with people under pressure, we might have things be delayed or take time to come through. We've got to prioritise to bring that infection rate down. Otherwise, we'll end up in a complete lockdown, and we could end up with more people in hospital than we already have. So thank you very much, Sean. There's a number of recommendations made within the report. So first of all, can I ask Cabinet, can you agree, note the verbal update as set out in the supplementary agenda, which is the presentation? Can we note that one? And can you also agree to recommend? Thank you. And can you also agree to recommendations made during the presentation? I will add one point in. It does say that it's in consultation with lead and relevant portfolio holder, but as always, we will do it in consultation with the leader of the opposition or delegated person. So is that part agreed?
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move on to item, let's go back to the old numbering so we don't get lost. So we go back to item number 3, which is petitions. We do have some notification about petitions being presented tonight. So first of all, are there any petitions from Cabinet members to be presented tonight? No. So are there any petitions from councillors present in the virtual meeting? I've been notified of 2. So the first one will be, is it from John Hinckley? John, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. Thank you, Leader. I would like to present a petition
asking for a controlled parking zone. It's for the residents of Chantry Close, which is a small road near Headstone Lane station, and it was left out when the larger CPZ was implemented in that area. It reads as follows. There are 40 signatories on this petition, and they represent 80% of the residents. We attach here with a residence parking permit petition for Chantry Road. Would you please give this consideration, as our lives are blighted by the number of cars parking in Chantry Road? As you will see, over 80% of the residents want controlled parking to be used as applied in Letchford Terrace, which is just on the other side of the road. Of those that didn't sign, there were 2 houses with 4 residents who felt that they didn't need one, and 1 house is empty.
Yeah, John, can you just read the terms of the petition and we can...
Yes, I am. This is what I'm reading. So, for example, we would like this to be considered as soon as possible, and we hope that you can improve it, because we are frustrated and desperate, as at times you can't find a parking space anywhere near your house. If you have any queries, please contact me, and I'm reading this on behalf of Mrs. Diana Laws, a resident of Chantry Place. The petition is with Democratic Services, and thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, John. Our LIP funding was paused for this year, although we have received some funding through. So it will be referred to TARSAP to see where that can be fitted into, to be investigated further, and also fitting into the programme if required. So that will be passed on to relevant officers. The second petition I've been notified about is Karima Marika. Councillor Karima Marika? Karima?
Yes.
Could you read out the terms of them?
Yes, thank you, Leader. It's I have no terms and conditions. I'm just talking behalf of the West Harrow ward constituents. It's regarding the LTN for project work. I'm speaking for our ward, Adams, Christine's, and my ward. These residents, when I have door knocked on those roads, have given their consent, what has happened and how they have faced it up. And I'm asking humbly from you, Leader, to reconsider it and do the Harrow way after the consultation finish, because they have gone through a lot, and they feel that they have not been consulted. So I know that you, as the leader and the portfolio and the Harrow Labour Group, will do the Harrow way. So I'm asking humbly the cabinet and all the officers who are involved in this project to do a reconsultation. Thank you, and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all of you all, and for the fantastic work the officers do. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Karima. That will be referred through to the review that's taking place, and part of the review process, and that will be done, considered at that time. So, is there any other petitions from councillors tonight? No. So now we move on to, are there any petitions from members of the public? I've been notified of one. Is that Mr. Prakash Raja? Would you like to read out the terms of the petition?
Sorry, good evening, I'm here, yeah?
Good evening, thank you.
Can you hear me all?
Yes, we can,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, shall I begin?
Yeah, if you could read out the terms of the petition, please.
Okay, fantastic. Well, it goes without saying that all elected officials are expected to have the highest standards of political and social responsibility. We expect all of them to be selfless, operating in selfless manner, showing integrity, being objective, and understanding who they're accountable to, and being open and transparent and being honest with their electors. We find that the petitioners of this particular petition believe and contend that the councillors in the ward of Headstone South have systematically failed to consider the interest of vast majority of the residents in sanctioning the implementation of the LTN initiative in the area. We ask them to seriously consider their position in light of their continued failure to adhere to the principles of service to the community, something which they solemnly swore to uphold on taking office. The 500 plus petitioners give notice to the 3 councillors, namely Councillor Simon Brown, Councillor Pamela Fitzpatrick, and Councillor Sashi Suresh, that they have damaged the bond of trust between us and seriously shaken our confidence in their behavior and in their performance, that they represent us or majority of the people. It is our contention that they failed to make residents aware of the original petition. They failed to comply with the Equalities Act. They failed to represent the residents at the council meetings. They failed to consider the emergency services which could have fatal consequences. And they failed the local businesses in many regards. And they failed to investigate the concerns of the residents, particularly the vulnerables.
Can you pause at the moment, please, Mr. Raja? You're now outside of the petition process because you're targeting elected representatives with a view. But if you could just read out the actual wording of what people have signed to, and then we can move on.
Well, there are about 500 plus people who've met the details, and all those are in the petition, and I don't intend to read all of them out. If I did, I would take up the rest of the meeting time.
What people, not the comments people have made, but the terms of what they've signed.
Yeah, that's what they've signed. They failed to make the residents aware of the original petition, which is what I read out.
Thank you.
And they've complied with the Equalities Act.
No, but if you've read the petition out, then that's they'll be now be referred to the relevant officer to taking that into consideration.
Okay. Well, I can generally give you 3 headings under which they failed.
No, it doesn't matter about 3 headings. This is a petition scheme where the words of the petition are read out and considered. That will then be investigated further by officers. This is not the time to actually give your view, because that would be an unfair position to be in. So, well, I mean,
as far as I'm concerned, these are the details in the petition itself, and in broad terms. I mean, I hope that I haven't done anything which is which is not in the petition. In the 3 main headlines, that they failed to adequately plan, prepare, research, or communicate this scheme that has been put in. They have failed to protect the ordinary residents' health, lives and livelihoods above the vested interest of some groups of the people. And thirdly, they have failed to listen to, let alone hear, the very real concerns of many residents of the ward. I can give you the details within each of those headings if you like.
Mr. Farger, I've said to you where we're going with it, and this is the end of it now. I'm just saying straight out. The petition scheme for the council is you can read out the terms of the petition, but it's not to develop what the rider's petition is there, which you're now attempting to do. It needs to be investigated by officers, and the supplementary information you want to present with that, and that will be investigated and you will be responded to.
Okay, so what do you want me to do? We'll send you the petition and the copies of it in due course. Is that okay?
If you could send it through to Democratic Services, then
yes.
If you've got their email address, then you can, they will acknowledge receipt of it and they will respond back to you as the presenter of the petition.
Fine, okay, we will do so. And just for clarity of everybody, I read the petition out on behalf of Mr. Suryakant Patel or Surendra Patel, who had initiated the petition, because he was not able to make it today, so I read it out on his behalf.
Okay, so you would like the response to go back to him then?
Well, it can be sent to me, and I can forward it to him, or I can forward it. They can forward it to Surendra Patel himself directly, because there's the Democratic Services has got the details of both of us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Are there any other petitions to be presented tonight? No. So we now move on to item number 4, revision number 4, which is public questions. As Councillor Varsha Patel can't make Councillor Varsha Palmer can't make it tonight. Those questions be answered either by myself or Councillor Adam Swirsky. So if we move to count the first question on the agenda, which is Samantha Pally. I see you there. Thank you.
Yes, hi, thanks for your time. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay, right. In a BBC radio show on 16th of November with London Mayor Sadiq Khan, I raised the issue of the LTN 06 with him and how it has created high traffic neighbourhoods of My Road, Manaway and the immediate surrounding main roads overnight. And he said his team would speak to Harrow Council. And can you confirm if they've been in touch and what the outcome was, as neither party has got back to me?
Yes, it comes through Transport for London, who have contacted the council with a number of questions that you've raised and a few others, and a response is currently being prepared.
Right, okay, so some going, okay. So just my follow-on question from that, is that okay?
Yes, if you've got a supplementary question.
Right. So having temporarily removed LTN 06 Southwell Park, at a recent council meeting when there was a motion to remove all of them, ward councillors all voted, and it was clearly done on party lines. And I'm told that the party whip, Ian Gilligan, directed all Labour ward councillors to vote to keep them, and that if they disobey that instruction, that they're expelled from the party. Now, this is completely undemocratic. So my question is, will Labour and Conservative parties both allow a free vote for all ward councillors, as this matter should not be party political? And I'd like to quote Martin Luther King, if I may, the time is always right to do what is right.
Thank you. A motion at full council is not a reason to change something, because it has to be formally investigated and whether it can be done. So it has to be done under traffic legislation, and we discharge that through the traffic meeting, which we call TARSAP. And then that report makes recommendations to either the cabinet member as Varsha or to cabinet itself, and it will come as a report to here to change that. We have to consider all road safety legislation before we can make changes to any scheme, and that's why the motion was not accepted. I can understand the views of residents. That has been quite well made over the past few weeks, and the review will be taking place in January with all the other schemes
But can
with the traffic meeting.
Can they have a free vote? What my question was.
It's nothing to do with but the politics of it all will take a longer time than having a debate here. It's about what is right and what is actually wrong. It'd be wrong to make a decision about lack of information, having due regards to the road safety advice that has to follow to make a change to a scheme. That is why we do it through TARSAP meetings.
I'm not clear whether ward councillors voting freely or not. What they're not.
I will give you a call and explain it all, because it'll take too long tonight to go through the rules and regulations of the council.
Well, I'd like to ask for a free vote for them next time. Thanks.
Can I just say that all my councillors will have a free vote if they want to?
They don't have free votes on other items as well. Question number 2. We have a question from Heshma Shah. Heshma, you're on mute at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. So my question is, how did you choose all the roads that will be blocked within LTN02 Pinner View area, and which criteria did you use, as you've closed so many in a small vicinity without looking at the true impact it would have on surrounding roads?
Hi, Heshma. It's Adam here. Thanks for your question. So in terms of the Headstone South scheme, which I think is number 2 on the reference, it was suggested by some local residents. There was, I think, a petition that was received in February last year. It feels like an awfully long time ago, which had, I think, nearly 400 signatures. And I think the extent of the scheme, as I understand it, was actually suggested in that petition and included all the residential streets bounded by Road, Harrow View, Station Road, Parkside Way, and Headstone Gardens. And that was considered by the traffic committee, TARSAP, in that month. There was approval given to engage a consultant to look at that request. So that's how we initially identify those roads for the low traffic neighbourhood.
But sorry, this isn't my supplementary question, but you haven't actually asked about what you haven't actually answered my question about what the true impact was, because obviously you put these in and you haven't looked at what's actually happening around it. It doesn't seem fair, and I obviously want to ask a supplementary question as well. But 400 residents, as opposed to the thousands that are in the Headstone South area, to look at their petition and their issues, but not look at the true impacts for all the other residents. It doesn't seem fair at all to me. Do you think that's a democratic way of doing things? And did your site officers actually ask everybody else what's going to be happening when these LTNs are put in?
Yeah. So Hashma, I think the 400 signatures on the petition was the reason why that was one of the areas that was identified for the trial. And then, of course, I think one of the things we'll turn to tonight and some of the other questions is the fact that this is a 6-month trial, and that gives us a lot of opportunity to gather feedback from residents like yourself, and ultimately to do a really full consultation at the end of that 6 months and make sure we've spoken to everyone. So I think your initial question was, why did we identify that area? And that was one of the initial instigators. But of course, we're going through the trial at the moment, so we'll have lots of opportunity to get everyone's views on that.
Okay, I do have a supplementary question. So 11 main streets in South London Borough of Wandsworth showed levels of nitrogen dioxide, NO2, a dangerous greenhouse gas, were higher when residential roads were closed. Then, when Wandsworth Council scrapped the roadblocks, the levels plummeted within days. Ella Adukisi, which I'm sure all of you guys are aware of, who lived very close to South Circular and died tragically of an asthma attack. This week, the coroner said that air pollution made a material contribution to Ella's death. I am a mum to a little 2-year-old boy whose life is only just beginning. I myself have asthma, and every day I walk with him to his nursery and to other places. Hundreds of very young school kids use our road to walk to Pinner Park and Noah Hill and to the many nurseries close by. I am really scared for my little boy now and for all the young children who live on Parkside Way, as you've turned our road into a mini South Circular by closing all the roads. In fact, 90% of the roads off of Parkside Way and South Station Road are closed. We cannot afford to move to one of the lovely quiet roads, which are more expensive and are now blocked off. Why should my little boy and all the young children and on all the main roads affected all be prejudiced against, as you've decided to listen to a small minority of residents, only 400, and actually, if I may also note, that only 530 people were consulted and less than 200 supported the scheme of residents who would like a quiet road. Yeah.
We've got a number of questions, and we would like.
I would like to finish this because this is very important to me and to the health of all the young kids in this borough. Where is the social justice? You've created a health inequality for the children of the LTN main roads, and I would like to know what you are going to do to change this. I thought Labour was supposed to care for everyone and not just the minority. Your own councillor, yourself, Adam Swirsky, you've basically turned around on the radio and said that main roads are designed for higher traffic volumes. Should this be at the cost of my little boy's health and that of all the young children living and using the main roads? People still need to drive, and instead of traffic being more spread out, now you've turned our roads into mini motorways. Please actually answer this question based on how you would feel if you were a parent of a young child living on one of these main roads.
Thank you, Hashma. And Hashma, I can't say enough how much I share your passion for tackling air pollution. And if you look at all the schemes that we've put in place, not just the low traffic neighbourhoods, all the trials, but also the cycle lanes, the school streets as well, school streets in particular, all of them are around trying to, one of their objectives is to tackle air.
But it's not. It's not. It's
no,
not.
Hashma, if you don't mind, Hashma, if you don't mind, I did listen to you, and I think it's important to have the dialogue. So I understand that you cited a study there, but of course, these schemes are also, we've seen from some of the stats, dramatically reducing traffic in the roads that they're affected. And as for the main roads, there is evidence from other areas that we don't know how much the traffic will increase over time. So that's why we're counting it. It's a trial. We're counting the traffic, and obviously the main roads are absolutely part of the consideration here. But in Kashmir, we're trying to make decisions here that benefit as many residents as we can, and ultimately to tackle air pollution. One of the most powerful emails I received from a resident recently was someone who actually was talking about their severely asthmatic child and saying it was the first time that they felt they could really live in their area. So these are all very tough decisions, and we're just trying to make a balance. But it will be all part of that consultation that we'll have at the end of the 6-month review.
Can I just say one thing now? Parkside Way is not Parkside Way is not being monitored. It hasn't been come on stats, so you haven't even done measurements in June.
Next question, please, because I'd like to try and get through the 8 questions, and we're running out of time. I know they're important, but we have limited time on the cabinet meeting for public questions. We've also got other questions from councillors on here, and we have a number of key reports about how we tackle not the budget situation, but a number of other situations as well. So could we move on to question number 3, please? Which is Mahbub Anis. It's to Councillor Keith Ferry.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yes.
Right. So my question is as follows: given the closure to the Royal Mail sorting office on Elburn Grove, and the subsequent reduction in the traffic in the immediate area, and without providing any evidence that it's been used as a rat run, why did the council deem it necessary to block Francis Road, causing my clinically vulnerable mother-in-law and elderly father-in-law and the local residents significant inconvenience?
Thank you very much, Mr. Anis. I am a councillor for that area, so I know it very, very well. The Elm Grove Road and the Francis Road corridor has always been an established shortcut used by through traffic, which is trying to bypass the station road. And the station road is a principal road network. The 2 routes run parallel with each other, and many concerns and complaints have been received by me and my fellow councillors from local residents over the years regarding this problem. This through traffic is detrimental to the environment, and in these residential streets, this area is therefore suitable for a low traffic neighbourhood.
I'd like to ask a supplementary question as well, please, if I may. And that is, you mentioned that there were complaints about the Elm Grove Road and Francis Road, and therefore you made that decision. Can I ask what sort of evidence, what form of evidence that you gathered to make that decision? Were there complaints? If so, I'm sure it's the interest of me and the local residents. Can we have some sort of data on that, please?
I've had complaints both by email over the last years or so, and I've also had verbal complaints when we've contacted the residents particularly in the Francis Road area and in the Francis Road flats. But they are concerned that even though there was a width restriction at that place, people were ignoring the width restriction and using it as a rat run.
Well, I've lived in that area, and my mother-in-law and father-in-law lived in that area as well. Everybody that I've spoke to, they disagree with that. There might be a one or two or number of people, but not the majority. And I think you're ignoring the majority.
Thank you for your question. We now need, if we're going to get through this, we need to move on to question number 4, which is from Atish Anand, which should be Adam. Atish, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Actually, this question is for yourself, Graham, or Simon, not for Adam.
Would you not ask the question?
Yeah, the question is, do you think it is okay for a death to be caused by the LTN and Harrow Council not to respond and move the LTN?
Well, I can answer it by just saying that the council is not aware of any death being attributable to the introduction of a low traffic neighbourhood. So
I've emailed you multiple times showing you videos of November the 23rd when the death occurred. I've emailed you subsequently 7 other times telling you this has happened, and you've ignored me every single time and not acknowledged or responded to any of my emails. Do you think that's okay? So if another death was to occur, you would continually ignore and carry on with your scheme because you think it's okay and you don't want to be shamefaced and take the scheme out, so you're just going to carry on with this scheme. Is that correct?
No. I've got a backlog of emails which I put on the auto response because we're trying to respond to some of the health crisis that is taking place in the borough, and I will finally get through to quite a few of these, the backlog over the next, hopefully over Christmas. I was trying to clear some of these out. We have spoken to the ambulance brigade locally, and they have said that whilst they do have concerns about some of the access points and how they get through, they do not think it reduces their time on it. And that's been quoted by the chief executive of the St John's of the London Ambulance Service, and is on a call if you want to hear that part of it.
Thank you very much, Graham.
Their major concern is the growing level of traffic on the roads across London, which has multiplied over the years, and that is causing more of a concern because it's blocking more of the wider roads out.
Thank you very much, Graham. I'll send you the FOI from the London Ambulance Service, and the email's also gone to every single councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. And question number 5 is from Kevin Mahon.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Henson. The LTN strategy is meant to bring about a measurable environmental and health improvement for the residents of Headstone South. It's our contention that we are experiencing greater levels of social distress, and in particular, higher levels of toxicity in the roads, such as Parkside Way, which is taking the brunt of the increased traffic as a direct result of the implementation of the LTN barricades. Air quality is a vital measure, and yet there are none in place anywhere in the area. That's also been referred to by a previous questioner. Why then did the council fail to take this objective into account when providing the single most important baseline data for the October review?
Adam, did you?
Yeah, I'm happy to come back on that. Thanks, Kevin. And thanks very much, Kevin, for the question. And as I said to Heshka, obviously, air quality is really, really important. I mean, in general, we've used the proxy of the number of vehicles, but I think that's, it's an important, I think it's an important consideration, very important consideration. And if we need to measure air quality separately, then that's something that through the traffic committee that can be put forward and done. In terms of what we're seeing in terms of the impact so far, we're seeing obviously a very big reduction in the traffic in the low traffic neighbourhood areas, an increase in walking and cycling. I think we are also seeing some increase in traffic on the main roads. Clearly, overall, that's likely to have been a reduction in emissions because there are some journeys that are now being made to alternative means. But obviously, we don't want any part of Harrow to see increase in pollution, and so we'll have to look at how that data evolves, and that would be one of the main factors that goes into considerations about what to do at the end of the trial.
Can I respond to that, Councillor, and say that a lot of what you've said is sheer speculation? You assume that vehicles are taking different routes. You assume that. All you do know is the number of cars that are using and vehicles using that particular road. You don't know how many, for example, are spewing out toxic fumes because they have somehow avoided detection by the police. So that argument you just put forward, Councillor, is a specious argument, and you know it, because there's no measure of the health conditions of the people that live in the area, and in particular Parkside Way.
Well, I think it's a very fair point that we can definitely take to the traffic committee that we should measure air pollution separately. But what I would say is that we are measuring both the traffic on the main roads and on the roads that are directly impacted by the low traffic neighbourhood. So we can see that there is some increase in traffic on the main roads, because it's outweighed at the moment by the decrease in the residential roads. And so overall, our assessment would be that there's probably a net reduction in emissions. But that doesn't mean that's true everywhere, and that's something that we need to keep a very close eye on. But obviously, and as I said, Kevin, that's something that we can look to measure in future.
Councillor, you can't be further. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry, Councillor Henson. I have to go back on this. I'm sorry, Councillor Henson.
Now, if you'd like to,
what Councillor said that if there's an increase in deaths on Parkside Way, they can be averaged out by the lack of deaths in these side roads.
Kevin,
that's not a good answer, Councillor Swirsky. I have a supplementary.
No,
the supplementary is this.
No, sorry, you just asked a supplementary question. Thank you. Can we move on to question number 7, please, which is Kinar Patel. If you're there, Kinar.
Yeah, thank you, leader. Thank you, Councillor. Yeah. So my question is related to the LTN 03 implemented on a Francis road in a Green Hill area. So my question is simple and genuine concern about after implementation of LTN 03 on a Francis road, I have witnessed that around 2 times ambulance, 1 time fire engine, and 2 times police incidents, and the vehicles being blocked by the planters implemented at the end of the Francis road in September 2020. This concerns me as a resident because this delays the response time for the emergency service and it can be fatal in some cases. So is it not in the best interest of residents to review and address this situation and remove the LTN 03 from Francis Road?
I can, thanks very much for your question. I can understand why that's a major concern for you. I've investigated this with the teams who are looking into it, and my understanding is that the closure in Francis Road has actually been located at an area where there's already a width restriction. So that means that the larger, wider vehicles that the emergency services use, wouldn't be able to gain access at that point anyway. So from that perspective, actually putting the low traffic neighbourhood in there hasn't changed the situation with respect to access. But I think one thing that may have picked up is that the fire service did go to the closure recently to actually undertake some checks on the routes and restrictions. And when we checked with them, they confirmed that was a routine inspection, that wasn't an emergency call out. So that's obviously something we'll keep close eye on, but we are in touch with the fire service and also, the other emergency services to make sure that we get feedback from them on a real-time basis.
Thank you. I have a supplementary question, if I am allowed to ask.
If you could.
So further to that, so under Freedom of Information Act, we asked London Ambulance Services, and they said they do not support any static bollards, lockable bollards, coffin bollards, gates or physical barriers like planters. So the main reason for this is that our vehicles do not carry any from GADA or FB keys to access the obstacles, and delays can be detrimental to patient safety. So therefore, response to that, is it not in the best interest of us, our health and safety, to reducing the response time for emergency service in case of, let's say, ambulance? And also one afternoon, we had signed a petition from 400 residents in a Green Hill area to remove the Francis Road LTN.
Yeah, thanks, Kunal. Again, I understand the concern there is very, very important. I mean, when we, before we introduced the schemes, we did reach out to our local London Ambulance Service contact. We didn't get any specific issues raised about the schemes. We obviously continue to try continue to engage with the London Ambulance Service locally. And recently we have had more intense engagement with them. And that's obviously something that's really, really important to us as we both review it on a monthly basis, but also make the decision at the end of the trial. So you're absolutely right that feedback from the London Ambulance Service would be one of the really, really important inputs that go into the decision to these schemes, both at the next review point, which will be in mid-January with the traffic committee, but then also in mid-March as we come to the final point of the trial.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't. I've been alerted to the fact that we missed question number 6, which is from Jeffrey Eldridge. Jeffrey, I know you're here. Did you want to ask the question?
Yeah, hi there. My question is, the people of Harrow we are talking to have little faith in Harrow's consultation process. Do not feel Harrow is listening to them. The process is not interactive, discriminates against the most vulnerable, and appears to give the council a false impression of what is actually happening in your community. Could you please assure us that this will be reconsidered, the way you consult, and ensure you do consult and consider the views of all members of the community equally and fairly, and apply this in a transparent way, as you say you do in your policy?
Hi, Jeff, and thanks for the question. And I completely understand why you feel it was a rush consultation, and it was because it was all done very, very quickly. And that was something that was obviously part of our emergency response to the pandemic. I can understand why, if you disagree with the scheme, then you feel, well, that was not appropriate. And I think there's plenty that we can learn from the process that we went through. I think the key for us was recognizing that what we were putting in place is something that was temporary. It was a trial. So for example, the website has been up the entire time, so we can get feedback on an ongoing basis. But what I also want to assure you, Jeff, is that as we get to the point of making decisions on the future of these schemes, we will be mailing out physically to all residents to make sure that no one is excluded from that final consultation and that everyone gets the opportunity to reply either by mail or online.
No, my question relates to your consultation process, not this particular thing. Your consultation process fails generally, not just in this instance.
Jeff, did you have a supplementary question?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I believe the way information is presented by council officers to you is misleading and incomplete usually. And it's your duty to make informed decisions. Why do you never question the reports you're presented with, especially when they have gaps in information? The last report you had on the LTN said there were no issues with the emergency services. And you clearly know that's untrue because of the information we've been giving you. There was no information from businesses. There was no information from TfL, and there was no information from ward councillors. And yet you state that's how you're making decisions. How can you expect the public to respond and respect your decisions if they are not based on sound, conclusive information?
I mean, Jeff, I take all that feedback on board and something we can take back to the teams and, of course, scrutinise the reports that come forward. I do know that when, you know, in the consultations that we typically do, for example, when we change parking, there are incredibly detailed reports that are shared with ward councillors. You can actually see maps, you know, very detailed maps of where exactly the responses have come from, who is for, who is against, how many, and so you can get a very rich understanding. Obviously, at the moment, you know, we're operating in an environment where, you know, the schemes were obviously put in place quickly. There's been part of the emergency response, and at the same time, as you know, as officers have been dealing with this, they've also been dealing with the whole COVID response as well. And you know, that's not an excuse. I understand that this affects you personally and many other residents, but I'll ask for you know your patience as we try and get this right. And obviously, as we come towards, you know, more conclusive decisions on the schemes, we'll make sure that those reports, you know, contain all the relevant information and include a very, very thorough consultation with residents as well. But Jeff, I'll take the feedback.
To be honest, you could do with a consultation on what people think of your consultation process.
I'll take that as well.
Larby. If we're quick, we should be able to get through the final.
Okay, good evening. My question is about the LTN too, because I live in the view. During the first week in December, I received an email from Pamela Fitzpatrick where she claimed that she'd been listening to our concerns about the emergency services getting stuck at the barriers on Kingsfield Avenue, and that they decided to leave them open after the gasworks on Station Road had finished, and that they were now in negotiations to further changes to the barrier in Pinnerview on the junction with Cunningham Park. I hope they will keep their word and will leave this open and will leave it open in the future, as this blockage is still causing concerns with access to the emergency services and community nurses and carers. During the meeting in September, October, I already made some suggestions to stop the congestion in Pinnerview, which she claimed that residents had complained about, by making it a one-way system or add double yellow lines at the bottleneck areas. When are you going to make a decision about this junction, and how long will it take for you to remove the barriers?
Well, no, thank you for that question. Obviously, as you say, those barriers were removed, you know, temporarily as a result of the roadworks in Parkside Way, because of that additional congestion that was being caused by those by the combination of the roadworks and the low traffic neighbourhood. And you know, as with all the schemes, we are reviewing them, you know, both monthly, and I say there's going to be a next public meeting in mid-January, and then also mid-March, which is the kind of key point at which we try and take those final decisions on what to do with the schemes in future. And as we've absolutely committed to, there won't be any changes to the planters that were taken out will not be put back in until there's much more further consultation has taken place. So that's the commitment that we can.
So you're prepared to risk our lives basically during the rest of the winter. We have to okay, my supplementary question is to you, Mr. Henson. After talking to residents of our boroughs, we can see that there is some line here emerging. It looks like the Conservative councillors are very more excited in applying the schemes and are keeping their residents very happy, while the Labour councillors are chasing the funding for the schemes without questioning how this will affect the lives of all the residents, and are now ending up upsetting them and will possibly lose their seats in the next local election. When are you waking up to this and start listening to the people you serve and prevent a political diversity of our councils being destroyed? Because I really wouldn't like that personally.
Well, as it's a direct question to me, I don't know what happens in other boroughs normally, but I do know that where schemes have been taken out, there's quite a large campaigns being generated to put them back in, because the amount of traffic that is going down narrow narrow roads, and the ones, some of them are now going through the court. Now, I know this is a very contentious issue, but I will state we don't go out chasing money. We go into undertake schemes that where people have previously requested in the past, and we've actually looked at how we could do that going forward. As Adam has said earlier on, normally we would like to actually have the proper consultation before the scheme is introduced, and then work out how, make sure it's delivered in the right way. This hasn't been the case around this. We lost all our LIP funding, which is our road safety funding, which comes from Transport for London, was stopped for this year, and so the only funding available was to apply for road safety schemes, which we have done through the 3 different avenues. As we said, with the legislation was changed to ensure that consultation takes place during the 6 months, where we would have previously like to have done it beforehand, and we will be doing that through to the 6 months time.
It's really a shame that you're not seeing that you're being used by the government with the Trojan horse, and you're going to lose all your councils, and the whole will be turned into a government, will be supported by.
Thank you, Mia. I want to go into the final question if we can. We've got a few moments left. I know we've well overrun on the questions, and but the final question is from Karen. Is it Jolliffe? I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Good evening.
Karen.
My question is, was the head teacher at Vaughan Primary School in West Harrow consulted before the implementation of LTN 04?
Hi Karen, nice to see you again. Yes, as we mentioned last night, there was the head teacher was informed about the scheme before it went ahead. There was some exchange between the head teacher and the traffic team about a couple of points, and that all happened before the schemes were implemented.
Okay, so my supplementary is that the head teacher who looks after 700 primary school pupils and staff, her school is stuck between 2 roadblocks. She said she was not consulted, her questions were not answered, and she expressed the view that a child is going to get seriously hurt. Will you give a commitment to have the planters removed immediately and explain your reasoning, please?
Thanks, Karen. And obviously, it was good to see the head teacher last night as well. And we have, that was the first time last night that the head teacher had been in touch with us as ward councillors. So obviously, we want to respond to that feedback very, very quickly, which is why first thing this morning I had the conversation, and we've been looking to make contact with the head teacher today to resolve specific issues that she raised. Of course, that's really, really important. And I know that, some parents have written to me to say that they are really delighted that the roads are quieter now as they take their children to one school. But clearly, the head teacher, has a really important viewpoint, which we need to address the issues that she raised last night, and we'll do that.
So you haven't answered my question, though. Are you going to commit to immediately remove them due to her statement to you?
I've committed to, and we're all committed to, the review in mid-January. It's the process goes to the traffic committee. Obviously, the feedback, received from the head teacher, from yourselves, residents, and others, all go into that committee, and we can make any changes at that point if we need to, or of course in mid-March as well. But I think the first step is to say the head teachers raised some concerns to me and my all councillors colleagues last night at 8:30 this morning. Well, in fact, last night we put out messages to try and address those. There's a further conversation at 8:30 this morning. Attempts to contact the head teacher today, and that's the kind of pace that we will operate at in order to try and address our issues.
But she had fed back
Thank you.
Months ago.
Thank you very much. That has concluded the council question, public question. Sorry, we have well overrun on the agenda time, and I'm conscious that people have been at work since 6:30 this morning. But we now move on to item number 5, which is the public question, councillor questions. Let me get it right in a moment. We're now moving on to the councillor questions. So the first question is from Councillor Marilyn Ashton.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and good evening. And can I just say, please forgive me, but I honestly think your best bet all round as the
Would you like to ask the question, Marilyn?
Well, yes, I am going to, but you're clearly not listening to people, and that is the problem all round. The question is to you, leader. Now that responsibility for regeneration has passed to the leader, and frankly, well, it will pass, is he willing to reconsider the decision to relocate the Civic Centre onto Pill Road car park? And would he consider investigating a town centre location or another instead?
Thank you, Marilyn. As you will recall, in previous pro-COVID times of last year, the Council commenced procurement for the Harrow Strategic Development Partner, and included within that procurement exercise was 3 core council sites, which is the current sites we've been talking about. So as part of the design development stage, which is part of the contractual stage, bidders were given the option to review all 3 sites and suggest the one that was the most suitable site for the new civic centre. All bidders recommended the Peel Road site due to its central location, regeneration effect on Wealdstone Town Centre, and the positive impact on local economy. We are now at the preferred bidder stage with Waits as the council's preferred bidder, and any changes to the location of the civic centre at this late stage in the process could have a detrimental impact on the procurement exercise and delay delivery of the HSDP programme, which includes affordable homes. So Marilyn, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, leader. Thank you. Well, thank you for your response. But I think actually you kind of answered the question before I've asked the supplemental, you see, because what you've done is you've actually said that this started out pre-COVID, we know that, and you've said that you've now gone into this partnership with Waits, but you've done that quite recently. And the Conservatives, who are briefed retrospectively, we have no say in this at all, which is regrettable, have always said very, very clearly, and you know this, that it is not the right time to develop these kind of relationships. And the problem is that because we've now got ourselves stuck like this, if we wanted to, you're right, it would be difficult, but not impossible at this stage to reconsider. You know, there have been very many very major high street chains that have gone into administration, and the struggling retail sector has in fact gone into freefall. So surely a new civic centre in the town centre would show confidence in the high street and support Harrow's businesses. Or if not there, then maybe we could make an effort to try and stay where we are and redevelop there. Or maybe we could find somewhere else in the town centre of an existing building. But you see, the problem is that you've actually trapped yourself to a certain extent against our better judgment into this relationship. And I think that if Waits and all the other bidders were asked the same question now, they may well have come up with a different answer. And we are really genuinely concerned about this. Because when we take control of the council in 2022, and the way you're going, you're making it rather easy for that to happen, if I may say, after the last disgraceful episode with really decent people not getting proper.
Marilyn, can you get to the point of the question, please? Because
yes, I will.
Will not
will you please finally, and at long last, accept that you might need to think again about this project? We are not convinced that you're going to get this right. Things have changed so dramatically because of COVID. And we honestly would urge you, before it is really too late, to reconsider. Will you give an undertaking that you will at least do that? Or are you so arrogant that you won't?
Marilyn, after 10 years of austerity, I don't see how you got a government in place anyway, because the appalling way that your government has treated the people of Harrow is outrageous. But I will say, as I said before, we have a number of consultations about the regeneration of Wealdstone, and I have to wonder what you dislike about Wealdstone as a place, because you didn't object through the earlier consultations that took place all the way through, and as I advised that the Green Hill Way car park site is a prime site, so we would actually end up with less affordable housing and also less opportunities because of the value of the land itself. and so we would actually lose access to a proper site. So as I say again, we're in a contractual situation with the HSDP, which is moving ahead to start building houses on vacant land, which are desperately needed. The amount of people, I was on a call earlier on today, and the number of people in temporary accommodation is escalating because of failed housing policies that you brought in. And I think you should be ashamed of it, really. So anyway, we've now moved on to question number 2, Councillor Anjana Patel. Anjana, did you want to ask your question, please?
Yeah, before I ask my question,
Anjana, can you ask the question, please?
No, hang on a minute. My question is to Councillor Varsha Parmar, and she's not here. I need to know why she's not here.
She's not here because she's somewhere else. Can you ask the question, please?
Yes, I will, but because I came to the meeting late, why are you always so rude to me? Before even I open my mouth, you're so rude to me.
I'm not being rude, Anjana.
Wow, every time I have noticed this, please do not be rude to me, okay? I will ask my question, and my question is to Varsha Parmar, and if she doesn't answer, if she's not here to answer, then would you please answer my question? Was the portfolio holder aware that the London Ambulance Service has written to Harrow Council along with the other boroughs in early July 2020, explaining that LAS does not support hard closures, including locked bollards, and that their preferences is for camera enforced model filters?
Adam, did you want to respond, or shall I?
No, I want you to answer.
Adam, would you like to respond, or shall I?
I'm very happy to respond if Councillor Patel's happy.
I'm sorry. Yes, Councillor Varsha Parmar is not here. I have heard Councillor Savorsky answering the questions to the public, and I'm not happy with it. So could you please answer the question, because it is a specific question to you now.
Oh, is there a question to me now?
Yes, because she's not there, so the leader answer the question.
Well, the London Ambulance Service had written to TfL expressing their views and guidance on low traffic neighbours in London as part of a regular liaison meeting organised between TfL and the emergency services. And that is what you quoted before. A copy of that letter was sent to the council on the 5th of July this year via email, and council officers provided full details of proposed schemes to the London Ambulance Service representative Harrow on the 6th of July and requested their comments and extended an offer to discuss any issues with them. In order to fully understand the chronology of events, it is worth noting that the proposed schemes for Harrow were submitted to TfL on the 22nd of May and approved by TfL on the 3rd of June. The advice provided by the LAS is being considered as part of a review of the low traffic neighbourhood schemes, particularly the use of camera enforcement, and these will form part of the ongoing consultation with the emergency services and our local communities.
Well,
do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. But what you have just said, that you did receive this letter in July 2020. I have been asking at every cabinet meeting a question, and I have been denied of this letter. And even up till the 1st of December, I was denied of this letter. I haven't seen it. And obviously in the letter, they clearly say that they are not in favor of this schemes that you wanted to introduce. So you actually introduced the scheme after even receiving the letter from emergency services. I am just amazed at the attitude that you people have taken towards the residents and towards the emergency services that is actually advising you. You're going against it. So my supplementary question is that why then did you proceed with these schemes against the clear advice of the London Ambulance Services is what I would like to know.
The London Ambulance profess their preference against certain uses of blocking roads, and that was made to TfL originally, and that was sent through to the council to ask if they had any comments about the schemes that were being implemented in Harrow, even though the TfL had already agreed those schemes in June. And this is while we were going through the consultation process. They did not object to those schemes.
They did object to the schemes.
Comment on a national conference or a London-wide conference regarding London Ambulance Service, where their chief executive operating officer said they actually supported the low traffic neighbourhoods because for a number of other reasons.
I don't think that is correct, because up till now I haven't been given anything in writing by any of the officers or the portfolio holder that everybody is in support, the way you're painting it. You know, you were quite rude actually. You cut people off. Residents only got this time to speak to you, and so have I. And if you're going to cut us off like this, you know, and not let us say what we want to say just because somebody has got up at 6:30, then unfortunately should not become councillors. If you can't actually spend time to do your duty, then you should not become councillors, okay? And that's what I would like to say. It takes whatever time it takes, and you have to listen to the residents and you have to listen to the councillors. Thank you, Chairman.
I take a lot of time to listen to councillors, and I find your wording quite offensive in some sense. In the basis that I regularly try responding to councillors when they're in difficulty, and they often phone me when they need things done.
Not us, not me, not us.
Yes, you haven't phoned me, so I don't have to. John, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. It's a question to yourself as Leader of the Council, and the question is, does the Council believe in supporting and consulting with community groups?
Thank you, John. As you're aware, the Council supports a whole range and large number of community groups, especially in times of officer time and guidance, and using it to empower local governance and decision making. As an example of that is the park user groups that have been operating for a couple of years now. And there's also relevant financial assistance within initiatives such as the Community Fund and the Harrow Winds project, which raises funds for local community groups. With regards to the consultation, we utilise a wide range of contacts to consult as wide as needed, and community groups are one of the contacts we use. We have active links with community groups and liaise with them on local matters as part of our day-to-day community engagement.
Thank you very much. May I ask my supplementary, please?
We can, yes.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's very good to know what you've just said. So the question is, how is it then, since the 10th of August, in an email from Corporate Estates, there has been no contact with the Headstone Horticultural Society regarding their future on the site that they currently occupy? The offer made at the July Council meeting to consult with the Society and explore various options, including allowing them to remain on their current site, has not come to fruition. Please, could you explain? Thank you.
Yes, I can. This follows on from a question I received at Cabinet, I think, earlier this year, asking, I think Marilyn asked the question around the Horticulture Society in the end of Long Elms. And at that time, we said a number of feasibility studies were being undertaken from the beginning of this year, but the COVID situation has paused a lot of this piece of work, and this is one of those that has been paused. There was discussions taking place to relocate, offers of relocation to some of to the group itself, and that all has paused as well. I think they're looking at 3 different sites, and some of those are being considered as an option to move forward. But the COVID situation, a whole lot has been paused. Thank you. If we now move on to question number 4, I think it's Richard Allmond.
This is to Councillor Brown. How much do you expect the next national living wage increase alone to add to the adults' budget?
Good. Thank you, Councillor. For clarity, the national living wage is increasing from £8.72 an hour to £8.91 per hour in April next year, which is an increase of 19 pence an hour, increase of 2.2%. And the impact on our adult services budget of an increase in the national living wage will show itself mainly in the annual care provider uplifts, as wage costs form a large percentage of social care placement costs. The uplift in the domiciliary care is likely to be around £300,000, with this being applied in April. For the home care and nursing home care sector, contracts are individual and negotiated separately across the year sometimes, and there are other elements aside from staff costs that have to be considered in these contracts. So the annual cost due to the national living wage increase is difficult to predict accurately, at this time for this sector. But if I was being conservative, it's likely to be in the range of £300,000 to £450,000 in a full year. There may be also small elements of cost increases within personal budgets. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor.
Richard, did you have a supplementary question?
Yes. Was that the figure in that case, £300,000 to £400,000, on which you used to arrive at your £1,046,000 care provider inflation? If so, it doesn't leave a lot of margin for other increases, other elements in your care packages. Are you satisfied that that's a realistic figure that's going to enable you to keep within your budget, or is it a bit of a guess?
Thank you, Councillor. To some extent, as I said, you can't be certain because these contracts are individually negotiated, and until you go through that process, obviously the council will be looking to get best value. The amount of money we get for adult social care, as you know, is limited quite drastically by government. The budget does contain contingency for this. The calculations were made, and the budget does include the calculation for increased living wage. But of course, we will always be looking to make efficiencies. We will always be looking to come within budget, and that is what the team in adult services are looking to do.
Thank you. We are over time, but we have 4 questions. If we can be quick, we could probably get through them. So, Richard, did you want to ask question number 5?
As you know, my questions are always quick. This is to Councillor Robson. What reason is there to expect that the completion of the review of SEN transport will lead to any savings?
Thank you for your question, Richard. I could go for the very brief answer, which is that you should trust us. You know the very good standing of the People's Directorate, of which the Children's Directorate is part. We are honest, we are hardworking, we are very frugal, and we work very hard to make sure that we stay within budgets where we can. But you know that we are a demand-led service, and the numbers of children who have special educational needs is growing all the time, and this glorious government is miserly when it comes to considering the needs of the budgets for these children. But we will do our best. We always will. There is a new review coming, which we're doing, the first one since 2016, and we're working together with the Community Directorate, and the review will be undertaken by members of both directorates.
Thank you.
I'm not implying, and never would do, that you or any of your colleagues in people services are personally untrustworthy, but what's required in budgeting is realism.
Well, I think we are realistic, and we're frugal, and we're diligent.
Could I finish my supplementary, please, before you try to answer it?
Please, Richard. Yeah.
Your February budget statement, February 2020, for the current year's budget, said that there was growth provided in the MTF of £789,000 for SEN transport, which had the intention of being removed over the following 2 years as a result of the completion of your review. The first part had been completed, then phase 2 had just started. This budget statement, the draft budget statement, understandably says that you've been hampered by COVID and you've not been able to carry out phase 2 and not likely to be able to begin it until 2021. So you've stuck in another growth figure of 777,000 in your draft budget. Say that will be kept under review as the review itself progresses, with a review to removing the growth as efficiencies are identified. Now, the SEN review and the savings anticipated at the outset of it are a little bit like the depot. It's always tantalisingly on the horizon, but keeps receding as we get nearer to it. Is there any realistic expectation that when you complete phase 2 of the review, you will actually realise any savings at all Or would the more realistic course be to say that you will complete the review, but you don't actually expect any budgetary savings to come of it?
It's very difficult to say, Richard. I am echoing Simon's response to you in this, and you know this. We are a demand-led service. There are rising numbers of children. We will do our best. The officers are exemplary. I trust them entirely, and I know that you do. I think it's just sometimes there are people who don't trust us. I don't think you're one of them. If you want a more detailed response, I could send you one, but I honestly think that we are in the situation we are in, and we will do our best. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
May I wish you happy Christmas, Richard?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, if we're quick,
this is a nice question to Councillor Swirsky, because he had such a mauling from the residents earlier on. Do you have a cost-benefit analysis of proposed capital projects before they're implemented?
Thank you, Richard. Well, in our capital programme, we manage it slightly differently to that. We do have a business case process. We make sure that the capital is released from the budget. It goes through a rigorous process. But it's only really in cases where there might be, for example, revenue or savings, where we would then do apply cost-benefit test. But that is applied in those cases.
The reason I asked is because at overview and scrutiny on the 8th, you were pressed by one of the members of the committee as to how much, this is on the IT presentation, how much savings you had in mind. And you gave a rather vague reply saying it wasn't a simple story, but you thought significant savings may be coming of the new model, but pressed further on the point that surely you had some idea of what saving you expected that you could share with the committee. You weren't able to give any answer at all. Is this a satisfactory way of conducting a very significant element of the capital programme, not only for this current year, but going forward several years in the MTFS?
I think you'd be quite right if we were investing in IT purely in order to deliver savings. I think savings are a positive side benefit to what is fundamentally a critical part of our overall programme to modernise Harrow Council and all its services, providing better service ultimately for residents. And we believe that ultimately that will reduce costs not only in IT, but by enabling more services to deliver more for less. They'll have benefits much more widely. So the savings are important to us. We're tracking them. We'll make sure that we do deliver them. But that's not the reason why we're investing so much in our IT provision.
Thank you, Adam. We now move on to item number 7, which I think is Councillor Stephen Greig. Stephen.
Thank you very much, Leader. Good evening. Councillor Swirsky, how many different council departments are involved in procuring and operating IT services to serve Harrow residents?
Good evening, Stephen. So we, as you will know, we run a model called Devolved Apps, which is sounds very exciting, and essentially means that applications that are designed for the use of a particular service are managed by that service, and they lead the procurement. Now, of course, even under that model, IT would always have an input into those, into any procurement, into any upgrades and so on. But fundamentally, as it stands, that's it's been managed by all our departments in terms of the apps that are relevant to them. But we obviously have made some very, very big changes to IT this year, not least insourcing our IT service on the 1st of November from our outsourced provider. And that gives us much more flexibility and control within the council. And as part of that, there'll be IT as a sort of central function will take more responsibility for the overall strategic direction of all technology and IT across the council.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm pleased to hear that the last bit that you said. I mean, it was good to see you at this month's ONS committee, and where we discussed the IT system. And what was very striking that even with the new system, a number of members asked about various technical issues faced by residents when accessing council's online services, such as web forms, the planning portal. A number of us have had problems with ModGov lately as well, only to be told that these are managed by various other council departments operating on completely different platforms, which often don't work well with each other, and the result can often be a very poor resident experience for many of these services. So my question is, doesn't this seem a very disjointed approach? Wouldn't it be better if this could be managed by a single department as soon as possible, not just taking more responsibility, but actually managing the whole thing entirely by a single department, so that the services can be operated in a joined up way to improve the experience of Harrow's residents when they try to contact the council online?
I have to say, it makes me slightly smile at the desire for centralisation, which I think is strongly reflected in the Conservative government as well. I mean, the reality is that unfortunately there is no one model that's going to be the answer. You know, there are IT departments that are very centralised, there are IT services that are very decentralised. These things are one of those wonderful things that goes in cycles. But just to be clear on what the position is today, you know, Ben Gowd as Director of IT essentially is in charge of the backbone infrastructure of IT in the council, of which there's a huge amount to do and a huge amount that's been done this year. Jonathan Milburn and Ben Jones are responsible for our customer services, and that includes the online systems, including our web forms. When they design new web forms, they work very closely with the teams, because one of the reasons I always say to residents, please contact us online, is if they email me, I'll email to someone, it will be emailed to someone that's in an inbox. But the whole design of our web form system is that as you click on the web form, as you submit, it goes directly into the systems of our frontline teams, so they can action it as part of their routine business, much faster and also much easier to track. I'm not saying we've got that perfect in any stretch, it's a huge amount to do, but that's effectively the model that we've been working with. And if you've got any suggestions, by the way, on how we can issues that people are facing with web forms and the online systems, or ideas, just drop me, Jonathan, Ben a note. And in my experience, when I've made suggestions or when I put residents in touch with them, they've actually been delighted to hear from them, and they've made changes very quickly. So it's one of the things we're really proud of at the council.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
One question left, so we might as well ask it if we can be brief, really.
Yep, certainly. And it's all about getting things that work and onto something that doesn't work. When did the latest monthly review take place of the Uxbridge Road cycle scheme, and what was the outcome?
So I'll pick this one up, Stephen. The last review took place at the end of November, and it was decided to retain the scheme at that review point.
Thank you. Thank you for the short answer. As we heard at the last council meeting, the number of cyclists using this scheme continues to reduce, whilst the level of congestion in the single traffic lanes continues to increase. Clearly, the whole point of an experimental scheme is to recognise when it hasn't worked and needs to be removed. So what is the criteria that you and your colleagues are using to judge whether or not this scheme should continue, and how long do you intend to wait before deciding whether to scrap it?
Yeah, and I think it's a fair question. I think to be candid, I think some of the people who are most against the schemes want us to set out some very mechanistic, very formulaic criteria to say, if X doesn't happen by Y date, then we'll scrap it, and if Z happens by Z date, then we'll keep it. The reality is these decisions have to be taken in the round, and I think particularly on the cycle lanes, in the end, we have a very, very clear strategy to try and increase cycling in Harrow and to make cycling better in Harrow. And if we don't start building up that capacity at some point for cycling, then we'll never build up our cycling in Harrow. So I think obviously, we want to make sure that all the schemes aren't causing issues. But if I'm very honest with you, of all the challenges we've had on the schemes, the Uxbridge Road one is probably the one that I've personally heard least about in terms of the challenge. If people are facing difficulties, they need to just get in touch, use the website, and obviously they'll all go into the review process.
Thank you.
Thank you. That has concluded all of the questions that have been submitted, and I think there's been offers of sending supplementary information back to a number of people, to a couple of questions, to give more depth to the answers. We now move on to item 6, which is the key decision schedule, which is the decisions made between December 2020 and up to February 21. There have been a number of changes to this schedule since its last publication last month. So can Cabinet please note that the following items have been withdrawn from the key decision schedule? The Harrow Statement of Community Involvement, the SCI, which is the amendments in response to COVID-19, and the long lease opportunity to provide newly built homes to use as temporary accommodation or discharge of homeless duty. They've both been withdrawn from the key decision schedule. And the following items have been deferred from the December meeting to the January Cabinet meeting. We normally have the HRA draft budget. That's now been deferred to January, which is the 2021-22, and the MTFS figures right through to 23-24. The borough-wide public space protection order to address environmental issues has been deferred. Consolidation of fixed penalty notices for environmental crime enforcement has been deferred, and review of housing and homeless strategies, and the part 2, which is the housing allocation schemes and the tenancy strategy and policy. So with all those amendments, can Cabinet note the key decision schedule, which is published on page 7 right through to page 22?
Noted.
Thank you.
Noted.
We now move on to progress on scrutiny projects, and they are published on page 23 and 24. So can we note the update on page 20 on those 23, 24? Thank you. We've done item 8, so we now move to item 9, which is approval for consultation for the Edgware Town Centre supplementary planning document being jointly prepared with the London Borough of Barnet. And although regeneration and de facto planning has been moved to me, Keith has been actively involved with Barnet preparing this report prior to consultation. So could I ask Councillor Ferry to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Leader. Edgware Town Centre is a major centre within the London plan, and it roughly covers an area 3/4 in the London Borough of Barnet and 1/4 in the London Borough of Harrow. We are seeking to produce a supplementary planning document which will aim to inform planning applications in both boroughs in this area for the next 10 years or so, and it will not change any of the underlying planning legislation which is contained within both boroughs' core strategies, but it will inform the way that the Edgware Town Centre we believe should focus in the coming years. This is a joint venture between Barnet and Harrow. It has been led by the planning department in Barnet, but the ward councillors for both Cannons and Edgware have been involved and have been consulted on these aspects. What we're asking for now is that the draft plan goes out for consultation with all the statutory consultees, with the public, with the ward councillors and anybody else that wishes to take any interest in it, and that we have it for a period of a minimum of 6 weeks, and we will try to make sure that the consultation starts at the beginning of January. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Is there any comments or questions on the report? As Keith said, this is going out to consultation, and it was referred back to Cabinet at a later date, and was also in partnership with Barnet, who are leading on this proposal. So can I ask Cabinet to note the recommendations which are published on page 26? Thank you.
Yeah, noted.
We now have to grant support to local businesses, and this part is the additional restrictions grant, which was announced by government. Keith, would you like to introduce the report?
Yeah, the additional restrictions grant is a grant of about £5 million, which has been handed to us to help mainly hospitality businesses at the time of lockdown. We have got certain amount of lateral thinking about whether we can spend this purely on the hospitality industry, or whether we can use it for some other functions. And on page 97, you will see that we have come to the conclusion that the principles for awarding this grant should be that we allocate a percentage of the grant to businesses over 2021 and 21-22 financial years. The thinking almost of today is that we will probably make a a payment almost immediately once this principle has been established and agreed by Cabinet, and we will probably make the second payment in the end of January, rather than taking it over to the 21-22 financial years. But that's the thinking at the moment. We, as I said, will try to fund businesses in non-essential retail and hospitality sectors. That is hotel, bed and breakfast, cultural, sports, leisure, and those. We will allocate grant payments to business with a rateable value below 51,000. Reason for that is that most of the businesses in Harrow with a rateable value of over 51,000 may well be national chains, or it may be places where head offices are located outside Harrow. I would ask that if we do have any local businesses that we feel should be allowed into this grants business, and they're slightly over 51,000 and they are entirely local, then we have some latitude with the grant for them. We will also want to allocate a percentage of the grant to businesses that don't pay business rates but do have fixed business costs and have been impacted by the pandemic. That could include some people that feed into the supply chain for hospitality and non-essential retail businesses. And finally, we wish to allocate 5% of the funding to business support programs to help businesses survive and grow, and help them maybe to trade online more, and allocate 2% of the funding to town centre improvements that will increase businesses' opportunities to trade and sell their goods and services. That may be, for instance, installing electric pillars so that we can heat outside areas. But as we know, the landscape of the country and of Harrow changes very rapidly. And so we have been asked that, although these are the principles that we've got so far, that you allow myself and the portfolio holder for finance and resources, in conjunction with the corporate director of community, to change these funds slightly should we find that there are people that do need our help. And that's what we're about, is helping businesses through this pandemic as much as we can.
Thank you, Keith. Adam, did you want to add anything at this stage?
Thanks, Graham, and I echo everything Keith said. I would just say that I think, we've obviously the teams work really hard to pull together what I think is a really good approach. What is ultimately a much smaller amount of money than we had available during the initial lockdown. So it's important to note that this support will be, I'm sure, welcomed by businesses and will be really important, but will be a fraction of what was initially offered. And the other thing that we're trying to do from my side of the fence and the revenues and benefits team is to make sure that we pay as many businesses proactively as possible, so that we don't have complicated application processes. Some people will need to apply, like the pubs will need to apply for grants over Christmas. We'll obviously make all that information available on the website and be contacting businesses to invite them to apply. So ask people to have a look on the website and to see whether they do need to submit information. But we will be paying, as we have done with the previous grants, we'll be paying as many people automatically as we possibly can.
Thank you, Adam. Councillor Paul Obston, you had your hand up for a question?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, obviously, I support this, and I think the hospitality and leisure sector is really suffering at the moment as we move into Tier 3. I was speaking to a restaurant owner a few days ago, and the difficulty they're going through. So I support this. One of the things I think might be helpful, though, and it's probably not for tonight, is if we look at some of the non-financial support we can give to businesses and some of the barriers the council sometimes put in place of businesses trying to do their jobs. I don't want to go into a specific example, but I've had a number of businesses in Headstone South and in Harrow on the Hill talk to me about the availability of parking. When the CPZ schemes are extended to much longer hours, the ability they have to park where there's not a nearby council car park is significantly limited. And whilst in theory we have business permits available to them, the reality seems to be it's almost impossible for them to get it. And I think there's a few other barriers like that, which when businesses are at the margin, which a lot of them will be as we come out of Tier 3, it's just important that the council has a sympathetic approach to these businesses. So I just implore the officers listening and the portfolio holder to just try and make an effort to support them where they can. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Is there any other points or questions? Your points around businesses, Paul, I think will be taken up by the TARSAT meeting when they look at controlled parking zones. They normally, the trouble is CPZs are normally requested around those sort of areas, mainly around train stations. I'd like to commend the staff because of Mark Billington's team, because they have engaged quite widely around preparing this scheme. They've been presenting it also at the business meetings, and they have been greatly acknowledged about the work that is being put in. Although, as Adam points out, it's a lot less than we previously put in.
Can I just join in thanking Mark Billington? He's a tremendous officer and does an amazing amount of work. He's really, really good. Thank you.
Yes, to develop this scheme was quite a challenge with all the other work you had to do, and it's an important point, really. So the recommendations are on page 96. Can we agree the recommendations?
Yes, we agree.
Agreed.
We now move on to item 11, which is a key report, which is the draft revenue budget for next year and the medium-term financial strategy for the next 3 years. Adam, would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you, Graham, and I'll take your advice this evening to keep my remarks on the budget to 2 hours or less. But in all seriousness, I understand it is getting late, but I think it is important to be clear on where we are in our budget position. So some people remember in the February council, when I stood up at the beginning of that council meeting to say that the council was aware of some of the incoming risks of a new virus called, perhaps I had never named then, or COVID-19, but at the same meeting, we passed our final budget for this current year. And that budget showed that although we managed to balance 2020, 2021, the following 2 years had a budget gap of around £23 million. And as this budget report now shows, that's increased to £37 million for the following 2 years. So our budget position has got a lot worse, and I'll explain why in just a second. And the other piece of context I think people need to appreciate is that just the extraordinary level of uncertainty that we currently face as a council and as a local government sector. And I think that Harrow is coming through this incredibly challenging time, both from the pandemic perspective and all the support the council's put in place around that, and also from the level of uncertainty we face in a pretty good position. We know some of our colleagues have had Section 114 notices, meaning that effectively the council has run out of money. That's really, really serious. We don't want to get anywhere near that. And that's why we're taking very, very prudent decisions over a long period of time, sustained prudent decisions to make sure that we have a budget that is sustainable for the future. And we've managed to set this budget without including frontline service cuts. But clearly there are challenging decisions in here, which I'll discuss in a second. I think everyone knows that our context as a council is that the money that we receive from central government is significantly lower than others in London and the rest of England. It's £170 per person lower than the rest of London. We always face this fundamental challenge, especially when naturally people will compare us to other councils, but we start on the race from a position well behind because of the low funding that we receive. And with that starting point, over the past 8 years, we've seen a budget gap of nearly £140 million. And that compares to an overall budget of just £165 million. And the reason we talk about that figure, 140 million, is because that's the combination of £50 million the government has directly cut from our budget, plus the additional demands that inflation and the extra demand on our social care teams has faced, which means that we would need nearly 140 million to fund all the services that we did 8 years ago. And as a result of all of these cuts, we now have in a position where the council tax that our residents pay funds over 3/4 of the budget. And bearing in mind that our social care teams are not far off 3/4 of the budget, effectively every penny that people pay in council tax funds social care, And then all the services people see more visibly are funded from small amounts of government grants, some business rates, and so on. So we have faced significant challenges, and the final one just to mention is that we have comparatively far fewer reserves than other councils, just £10 million of general reserve. But I'm proud that despite all that, we've had 8 years consecutive balanced budgets, taking incredibly prudent decisions. And now we face a pressure that is far greater than any we could have anticipated this year, and that is COVID-19. And alongside all the devastating impact it's had, it's caused us as a council to spend an extra £13 million to lose income worth £24 million. That's things like council tax, business rates, and other revenues. And that altogether is about £37 million of impact. And while the government told us they would do whatever it takes to support councils, in fact, they've only given us £20 million of funding, which means that we're worse off by around 17 million altogether. So that's incredibly serious as an additional impact coming on top of what was already going to be a challenging budget. And we're trying to set this draft budget at a time when things are meant to be more uncertain. The Chancellor cancelled the budget this year. I wish, we as the councils we can't cancel our budget, and we can't just borrow like the government can. We have to set a balanced budget, and we have to set it in draft in December and in full in February, no matter come rain or shine. The Chancellor also turned a 3-year spending review into a 1-year spending review. It didn't give us any clarity on the future of COVID emergency funding or on adult social care funding, the two biggest uncertainties. And despite, on top of the policy uncertainty that the government gives us, we also have the path of the virus, which we know has a huge impact on the economy, on our ability to raise council tax and to support residents with council tax support, and also on many of our income sources, other income sources as well. So how do we get to a balanced budget for the next financial year? Well, we're taking some very proactive actions. We're making sure that we keep a really tight rein on spending, not just next year, but all the way through. We're also keeping our capital program tightly managed as well. And in some cases, we may find assets that we no longer need and we can sell, and that will generate some revenue as well. The council is still a net investor in Harrow, but it's important that we look at all options to keep our budget balanced. We're also looking at strategic use of reserves in this budget, and that's, I know, a concern to many because reserves are one-off. You can use them for the next year, but then they're gone. And I wanted to make sure that when we set this budget, even with all the uncertainties that we face, that we're only using reserves to set a balanced budget that were expressly built up in past years through prudent decision-making, expressly designed to help us with filling budget gaps. So these aren't our general reserves. They aren't reserves that we set aside for specific purposes. They're reserves we built up in the past to try and make sure that we've got ammunition in case of emergency to set a balanced budget. And in fact, some of those reserves are reserves that we already intended to use this year, but through prudent decision making have not used, which allows us to use them next year. So at the moment, we've set aside some reserves to use to balance that budget. We're hoping that by February, or as we go into the next financial year, there will be other ways of managing that spend, so we don't even need to use those reserves. But because of the level of uncertainty, we need to make sure that even in a worst case scenario, we can get to that zero balance. Now, I need to say something about council tax, because that's one of the few tools that we have as a council to raise a significant amount of revenue. And I've said for several years now that the way the government has acted, they have clearly and unambiguously nationalised council tax. And the Local Government Association, which is a cross-party association of councils, said very, very clearly, they said, it's good that the spending review of Rishi Sunak provides a potential increase in the council's core spending power to support vital local services. However, this assumes council tax bills will rise by 5% next year, which will place a significant burden on councils. Council tax rises, particularly the adult social care precept, have never been the answer to the long-term pressures faced by councils, particularly in social care, raising different amounts of money in different areas unrelated to need. It is not the long-term solution which is desperately needed. but that is the only solution that Rishi Sunak has left us. And the Daily Mail itself said, Mr. Sunak skirted around the details of the increases in his common speech. He said, we're investing in social care. Local authorities will have extra flexibility for council tax and adult social care precept, which, together with some new grant funding, gives them access to an extra £1 billion to fund social care. The Express put it much more simply. Its headline said, Rishi Sunak sets to increase council tax by 5%. And the rest of the article was subtitled, How Britons Will Be Affected. This is a national tax that impacts our local residents. A couple of final points before I sum up. Firstly, on public sector pay. I think it is extraordinary and quite disgraceful that in a year when people stood outside their doors, stood outside number 10 and number 11 Downing Street to clap out public sector workers, that the thanks they get for that is a freeze, and therefore, with inflation, effectively cut to their pay. Well, the Chancellor does not have the power to set pay in local government. That is agreed as part of the local government pay settlement between the unions and councils. And we have set aside money in our budget to fund the pay increase for our workers because they deserve it and it is rightfully theirs. Finally, I want to end to remind people that no matter how difficult our budget setting is every year, we're still able, as a Labour Council, to make very positive investments in our borough. And you'll see in the budget that we set last year, in February, that we included investments in our council tax support scheme and community cohesion and other major priorities. Those investments in council tax support specifically have been helping residents out during this incredibly difficult pandemic. They were investments that were made with foresight, and they have paid dividends for our residents who need them most. We've committed, just at the last council meeting, to becoming an official living wage council, making sure that we abolish poverty pay for people who work on Harrow Council contracts or for our council directly. We're building a better Harrow, and that involves not only our regeneration programme in Wealdstone and some of our areas that need that could really benefit from regeneration, but also by building more than 650 council homes, by far, the most in a generation. We're tackling long-standing injustices with our work on Black Lives Matter, and we have, of course, supported our residents through COVID-19 from the very start, creating new public services around our community health and food delivery network, distributing business grants, providing hardship funding, and bringing in rough sleepers. So this is a budget which I take no pleasure in sitting here and providing difficult news to the Cabinet and to people in Harrow. It's the position we find ourselves in, and we have done, and I thank Dawn and Sharon and our finance teams, but also all our officers who've worked incredibly hard, not only to deliver all the support during the pandemic that they've done, but to do that while leaving us with a financial position that is sustainable for the future. On that note, I move this report to the Cabinet.
Thank you, Adam. We have one hand up, which is I'll comment at the end, I think, but Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I did think Adam Swirsky said he wasn't going to talk for 2 hours. It certainly seemed like he was talking for 2 hours. But anyway, I won't talk anything like as long as he did, because there's plenty of opportunity both at the Cabinet in February and the Council in February to discuss this. But there's just a couple of points I think I would like to make given what he said. Firstly, I don't think you would ever get certainty from government at this time. Most of the meeting has been talking about how uncertain times are at the moment. The idea the government could do a 3-year spending review in the middle of all this, I just think is totally unrealistic. He says the council can't borrow like the government, but it's worth noting the council's borrowing is in the hundreds of millions and is more and more overwhelming the revenue budget. And it is vitally important we get our borrowing under control. And just on the staff issue, look, obviously the staff have worked really hard. And I do think, and the public sector pay review is looking at making sure that the poorest people don't suffer and that they get an increase. But when you look at what's happening in the private sector at the moment, and some people who've also worked incredibly hard, they're looking at their businesses going, they're losing their houses, their jobs are going, they look with envy at the public sector and the job security that a lot of people have and the pension that a lot of them have. And just to accept that at the moment, as we go through this time, when everyone is suffering, that we should just, without question, be giving some of our officers who are on, £100,000, £70,000 a pay increase. I'm just not sure now is the time. I just also note that you talked about the London living wage, and we were happy to support that motion, but I couldn't see a line in this budget, and I did ask Dawn for a line in this budget that would show where you were trying to put money aside in order to, when you renew contracts, have them on the London living wage, and there wasn't any. I did ask where the money for the Black Lives Matter things that you want to do are in that budget. I did ask where the money for the climate change emergency work we want to do was in that budget, and there doesn't seem to be any. What we do have, though, is a load of pots of money in various contingencies and reserves that are getting ever more confused and incorrectly named: the business planning reserve, the business continuity. I mean, you just can go through the list of the. I would strongly recommend that you actually start to consolidate those reserve pots. Otherwise, what tends to happen, if they're not used for their primary purpose, they get used as a kind of pile of money for some other purpose, which may well be very well justified, but it doesn't get the degree of scrutiny it would if it went in the budget as an individual line item. So that's what I've got to say at this stage, but obviously we'll take it further in February when we have two chances to talk about it.
Thank you, Paul. As you say, this is will go out to consultation, and we will discuss it in February and also at the full council meeting when we set that budget. So there'll be other opportunities to talk those points. Is there any other questions or contributions?
Graham, can I come back just briefly on that, on some of the points? I think they were important points.
Of course you can.
Just very briefly, so very good points on the London living wage. The next step from the council motion is to look, systematically at our contracts and work out exactly what it would take over a planned period of time to get ourselves to the London living wage level. And as part of that, we'll absolutely be looking at how do we make sure that we've made budget provision for that. So that's a really, really important point. I just signed up a contract today, which we agreed to pay additional to make sure that those staff are all paid London living wage. On Black Lives Matters, we've obviously, in fact, that is an area where we clearly are putting some investment. And I hope you've received an update from our policy team, because they have done an absolutely extraordinary amount of work in a very short space of time. But we're absolutely committed to our agenda. And on climate change, actually, that is an area where, funnily enough, we do have explicit lines in our capital programme. Looking at the solar panels on roofs of buildings, we've allocated funding for a climate change officer who's in place and doing a brilliant job. We're one of the lead councils in London on one of the key strands of climate change work. So again, something where we are investing. But I'll just come back to a point on uncertainty. I think it's fair to say that the environment is uncertain, but I'm not sure the government needs to add to that. I mean, we had a furlough scheme that was stopped and then restarted and then extended. We were told to eat out and then we were told to eat in. And we had a winter economy plan that was binned before winter. So I think it's fair enough to say, we're in a pandemic situation, things are uncertain. It is another thing to kind of compound that uncertainty and not give local government the money that it needs to fund itself during this incredibly difficult time.
Thank you, Adam. Was there any other points that anyone would like to make? I am aware that this is the draft budget, but I will go back to that part around uncertainty. And the LGA have been quite clear that they're very concerned about the uncertainty from government at this moment in time. And if you look at one of the recommendations within the draft budget, the amount we're getting from government, although announced today, Dawn, our Section 151 officer, is trying to work through those figures to see how it affects our budgets. And it's very late in the day, and some of this won't be confirmed until next year. We also got massive uncertainty around adult social care, and that's once again has been put off. And I'll go back to Adam's point that when we asked for funding for increased responsibility and rising demand around adult social care, we got told to put council tax up. So the increase that is announced to £4 billion into local government, 3/4 of it is through increase on our council tax, and that is putting the burden back into Harrow residents. It is uncertain times, And once we know the outcome of all the financial jiggery-pokery, the hokey-cokey of the statements that are coming through and other funding that's likely to come through, then we can probably have a more settled budget for February next year, as long as they make those announcements in time, noting that the budget announcement from government is after when we have to set a council budget. So there is a number of recommendations on the reports, and they are quite wide-ranging, noting a number of parts that are in there, and people to have inputs into that. There's also a number of recommendations to say what we should do next. And I'm just looking up the notes on one of my things. We're also looking about how we're going out to consultations. The consultation, the budget will start soon, and the recommendations come back to February Cabinet, and then we'll agree in full council in February. So all those recommendations that are on the report, are they all noted or and agreed? Some are noted.
Noted and agreed.
Noted and agreed.
Thank you. Agreed. The only reason we took more time on this one, not the 45 minutes, but 4 to 5 minutes, was because it is the major part of the council going forward and what we're obligated to do and how we do it. So item number 12 is the draft capital programme for 21-22 all the way through to 23-24. So Adam.
Thank you, Graham. This one I'll just be 3 hours on, so we'll keep it even shorter. I know I've got a very soporific voice, clearly, because I think I spoke for about 12 minutes, but maybe I'll try different tenors for you, Paul, keep you awake tonight. So in terms of the capital programme, I had lots of feedback from scrutiny committees around the concerns that we allocated a significant amount of money that wasn't spent this year. That was obviously significantly driven by a large amount we put in for potential property investments. We have reviewed that. We don't think it's the right strategy in the new environment. We're taking that funding out. So ultimately, we've put in £10 million, but we've removed £127 million of capital. And so there's a net reduction to the programme there, although that doesn't necessarily mean we have less financing costs, because a lot of that capital was offset by potential revenue. So ultimately, there is some additional financing cost associated with the capital programme, but really most of it is from 2023 onwards, and so it doesn't significantly affect the current sort of budget round. But obviously, all of that capital will only be spent on the basis of business cases that are presented to our capital forum and released on that basis.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you. I'm not going to make a speech on this, but I just want to ask a question. How, given all the scrutiny we put capital projects through, did the Vernon Lodge thing get as far as it did?
Well, I'm not sure as far as it did means, because we ultimately didn't release, ultimately we didn't proceed with the original version of the scheme, and we're looking at how to make best use of those sites. So in the end, as you go through, complex projects, you will have to make some changes. You will find that some, go through smoothly and others are less smooth. And I think that's just the course of nature of things. What I'm very concerned about is that, we come down so hard on areas where we have issues that we actually prevent officers from coming forward with ideas. So we need to make sure that we're open to ideas, we put them under the appropriate level of scrutiny, and then we make changes as necessary.
Okay, Adam, is there any other questions or comments to be made? The recommendations for the capital programme are on page 116. Can we note the recommendations, please?
Noted.
Noted.
I'm conscious of the time that we are now. You can't note the time, but
I think I can keep the next few slightly.
We got some important items that we need to properly debate before going out to consultation and agreeing. So can we extend the meeting to sufficient time to do it? But please take note of to keep comments briefer, if possible, brief. So is that agreed? Thank you. So if we move to the item 13, which is the revenue and capital monitoring quarter 2, as at the 30th of September. Adam?
Yes, I can really move through these quite quickly. To be honest, I wasn't going to say very much at all on this, given that we've already updated Cabinet in October. There's further updates in the budget report as well. So it has been through scrutiny. I think if there are any comments, happy to take them.
It has gone through scrutiny. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's really following on from the point I've just made. And it's interesting, Councillor Robson talked about just trusting officers and the officers are motivated for all the best reasons, which I have no doubt. But I think our job as members is to provide challenge and to ensure that these decisions are correctly made. And then I look at paragraph 3.47, which I noticed skimmed over and hasn't been reported to Cabinet previously, where it outlines a £5.7 million overspend in the depot redevelopment. A shocking overspend, over 20% over the budget. And it doesn't even mention one of the more fundamental problems with the business case, which is the business case that Cabinet agreed was to add 2 floors to the top of the depot site in order they could be let out for commercial property. Unfortunately, the planning committee specifically put a condition in saying it couldn't be let out for council for commercial property. And I know, just in passing, that Councillor Henson was sitting on the planning committee at the time and didn't point this out either in Cabinet or in the planning committee. So I do think that whilst obviously we don't want to stop officers coming forward with ideas, and we don't want to make them gun shy, and we don't want to make them unwilling to step up, we also have to be clear that there has been a number of quite significant failures when it comes to the regeneration project, when it comes to the depot, when it comes to a number of other things. And I think it's important that we as members, both you as the administration and me as the opposition, hold people to account for their failings, as well as rewarding people when they are successful.
You can feel me to respond to that. I think it's a very fair, very fair point, and obviously the conversation around the challenges in the depot have gone to a range of committees, not least GARMS, because there are a number of issues that we simply have to deal with around that.
And can I just ask, do you, as the portfolio holder, sit on the capital forum that looks at these business cases and looks at these bids?
Not the capital forum that looks at all the capital programs, but any significant capital program would come through me and usually other portfolio capital members as well.
So did you specifically look at the business case for the depot and did you agree it? And do you now regret that you didn't notice it was a fundamentally flawed business case?
Well, what I'll say on the depot is that that business case went through a great deal of challenge. Of course, there are a number of issues there, which I think we talked about in other forums. Some of them were about the information that was supplied in different places, and obviously that is a major issue which we have to deal with. And the second thing is that there were clearly a range of assumptions in there, and I think it's absolutely fair to say not all those assumptions were right. So I think there's a whole range of issues in a major development like the depot that some of them were matters that have to be dealt with from a governance perspective. Other matters are a question of how do we learn some lessons from business cases. I think in the end we need to be clear to residents out there that their investment has gone towards a ultimately brand new, very functional, highly functional facility that's going to help us to regenerate the post corner site quicker, delivering more affordable homes, delivering ultimately a new civic centre at no cost to the taxpayer. So I think we shouldn't. I think that we should separate out a whole series of issues which are very important. Before I think you're quite right to hold us to account and officers to account around, and which we also need to are and need to help people to account around, versus the benefits ultimately of what has been delivered.
Did no one realise that it didn't have planning permission for commercial property and couldn't have planning permission given the current policies that we have? And therefore the whole business case was flawed from the beginning. It was not a question of a figure or two being wrong. It's fundamentally flawed from the outset. And yet here we are towards the end of the project, £30 million project, £6 million overspent. And no one seems to be admitting that they made a basic error. And frankly, ultimately, it's the Cabinet's responsibility to pick this up. And even your responsibility as the finance portfolio holder, or up until now, Keith Berry as the regeneration portfolio holder, to pick this thing up. Or even Graham, who sat on the planning committee that made the whole business case totally unsustainable. And I just think some acknowledgement that you made a mistake would be nice, rather than tucking it in on page 300 and something of a report and not mentioning it at any stage.
Well, I think you're probably getting to the end of this point, but there's a few things there. One is absolutely there are serious issues. I think to say it's been tucked away, given that it's had high profile attention and numerous scrutiny committees, including GARMS, and the depot is mentioned in almost every finance report that there is, I think it would be hard to say that we've tried to shy away from that one. But there have been issues, there have been actions taken, there are things that we need to learn from it. I would say, just to be very, very clear, because people might misunderstand, that the depot was not contingent, the entire depot facility was not contingent on renting out two top floors. Clearly, the decision to increase the scale of the depot by 2 floors, there was a certainly a key factor was, yes, we could rent that out if we needed to, obviously all provide additional space for council staff. There was a major issue around the fact that by the planning permission, there's no doubt about that. I don't think that scuppers it, because I think that things can be looked at again, but I won't shy away from the fact that there's a big issue around that.
This is the last thing I'm going to say tonight, so please let me. You also assured me at Q2, when I specifically asked about the depot, that this project was on time and on budget and there were no issues. It now turns out we have a £6 million overspend.
Well, I won't make it. I think it's fine for you to leave that point hanging in the airport.
We'll make the point that when we was brought to notice through it was taken through GARMS, and these they were addressed at this time. There has been some oversight in some places, but there is and others it's been addressed very quickly, so it hasn't escalated to the extent that you're inferring, Paul. But I will say that there has been probably oversight in some things. I mean, going back to the planning permission, that was a recommendation at the time, which could also come back to, as like people do, to review that part of the planning permission. And I'm not an expert in planning, but Keith will tell me if I'm saying anything wrong there. But as Adam says, this is and most of the information in this report has now been superseded by the draft budget report, and it will be in further reports going forward. The depot was moved through the GARMS report the meeting before last, and the recommendations, I think, is just to note the report. So it just says ingredient recommendations that are on page 138, which it's, they are there. So if there's no other questions, can we agree the recommendations on 138?
Agreed.
Agreed.
We now move to a very long report on item 14, which is the calculation of council tax base.
I'm disappointed Paul has signalled he doesn't want to come in on this one. This is a key report. But I would say, we have set a 98% collection around our council tax, and we continue to set that despite all the challenges that we have, and that's really, really important to maintain that financial stability. And the fact that Harrow continues to add housing to our supply does allow us to offset the fact that we have a lot more council tax support cases, and that is again, really, really important benefit of having an increased housing supply alongside obviously addressing housing prices. Now the report does say we're not reviewing council tax support. I just want to be clear that that doesn't stop us from providing additional benefits or discounts to the non-council tax support, which is something that we're going to be looking at in advance of final budget as we get more information from the local government finance elements.
Thank you. Is there any questions on the report? Yes, we can change the council tax scheme, but if we want to make it some certain changes, we have to go to consultation in January, which is why this is on this report. But I would pay credit to not just Fern and his team, but also the residents of Harrow that continue to have a high payment of council tax collection, and that having a target of 98% is one of the highest in London. And as Adam said in the draft report earlier on, which is reliant on 78% of our overall budget needs to collect council tax, a 1% change in our collection rates could have a severe impact on our overall budget going forward. So the recommendations are on page 201 and 202. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move to the 15, estimated surplus deficit of the collection fund 2020-21.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So you'll see that on the council tax side, we've actually come on a balance, and that's because the increase in council tax in 4 cases, about 1,700, balanced out by the growth in property. So that's again, a really good position to be at this point. On business rate side, there's a £30 million deficit, but that is covered through the central government grant, so there's no issue or impact on the council's budget.
Thank you. Is there any comments? No. Can we note the agree the recommendations on page 200? What number is it? 201, 202.
Agreed.
Thank you. We now move to item 16, nearly there. Arrangements for the supply of temporary staff services and permanent recruitment services. This is a key decision. So, Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. And this is allowing us to go back to award a contract to our departments for continued provision of temporary recruitment for 3 years. It's also a 1-year extension on the provision of permanent recruitment through PERTEMS. You'll see the report does consider the option to insource that service. That's not deemed feasible at the moment because of the huge challenges, capacity challenges the teams are facing. But the fact that it is only a 1-year extension obviously gives us more time to consider that more fully in the new year.
Thank you, Adam. Is there any comments or questions on this report? It is quite a key report because we do rely on temporary and agency staff, and we need to ensure that we sort of manage that very well. But they're also moving into the recruitment part as well, which will save us time and trying to recruit into that area. So the recommendations are on page 200.
I know because Adam wanted me to say something else. I just think, I accept now is not the time to bring it in-house anyway, but just to jump over the massive financial cost it would have been to bring it in-house. Sometimes outsourcing is a much better option.
Golly gosh. Well, I'm delighted that Paul has decided to come in at this point because I was missing his voice in our debate. But I would say that, look, we have gone through a significant journey on HR, the way we structured HR. And it is unusual, let's put it this way, for any organisation to outsource permanent recruitment because it's a strategic function, a bit like IT. We're in a position where PERTEMS, the contract with PERTEMS has served us well, it's served the purpose, it will continue to serve purpose in the next year. And obviously we'll look at it properly and make a balanced judgment. But, based on the full belief in our council officers, our public servants to do a brilliant job on these incredibly important strategic functions.
Thank you, Adam. So recommendations, as was said, were on page 208. They agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
You now move to any other urgent business. There is one item on the agenda. There is part 2 item, which we can't mention if possible, as we have to go into exclude everyone from the meeting. But Keith, did you want to briefly introduce the report?
Yeah, we won't have to go into part 2 because my modern Gov application won't allow me to get the restricted paper, so I haven't seen Appendix 2, so I can't even refer to it. The NHS, or part of the NHS, have chosen Byron Hall to be the second location that they wish to provide within the borough to vaccinate our people against COVID-19. In order for them to be able to occupy Byron Hall, they have to take out a licence, and we're asking for permission for myself and the Corporate Director of Community to approve the final terms of that licence so that they can start vaccinating as soon as possible. It also occurs to me, but I haven't talked to anybody else about this, but because they may wish to use other council sites, I would like to add in a third recommendation, which says that if we are approached by the NHS for them to use any other council sites, and I'm thinking in particular of something like the Civic Centre, then you have delegated authority to me in a similar way for other sites.
Paul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, just because Keith mentioned it, I do think that the IT issues around modern.gov are quite significantly impairing members' ability to look at papers. I know at least 3 or 4 members of my group have a similar, or maybe slightly different, but an issue with regard to it. But I think there's some kind of logjam between democratic services and IT. And I know that everyone is very busy with COVID and all the other stuff. And I think this vaccine thing is amazing, and I'm really glad it's come and being rolled out so quickly. But I do think they're trying to pick up that issue, and I just ask the officers that are listening if they could make sure that gets prioritised, because having a cabinet member not able to see a Part 2 paper on the thing that they're going to vote on is quite serious.
Thank you. I know some people are having trouble with modern.gov, but you can access this through the portal by using logging in through the Citrix on the Surface Pro, or remote access people have got. So if you connect through there and then link through, it does take you to the Part 2 papers. It is a challenge that they're trying to resolve the issues you say, Paul, around the use of modern.gov as the app, which gives us the Part 2 papers as well. In answer to Keith's question, I think what we're doing is issuing a license to our own property, which we have to do under the Local Government Act of 1970 something or other.
Yeah, it's just that if we didn't give them a license, which is very much like a sort of temporary lease, they wouldn't have security of tenure for 12-month period. So they could set up all the stuff in Byron Hall, and we would be quite within our rights to go in there the day after and tell them to get out. So this provides them with security. They know they can use Byron Hall for 12 months. And there's nothing we can do once we've issued them with a license, which we will be doing in the next few days. And also I might add that we have had discussions with everyone active who operate the hall, and they're on board with this as well.
Thank you. Christine, you have your hand up. Is that asking a question or a comment?
It's a final comment, actually, Leader, if that's at all possible. It's just, and it's nothing to do with the business as such. I just would like to thank all the officers who have been attending this meeting and supporting this meeting, and many of whom have been working since 6:30 this morning and every morning. I think you made a reference to that earlier on, which was misconstrued. It didn't seem to me that it was a self-centered comment about you being up since 6:30, but far more about the officers to whom we should offer our thanks and gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. The recommendations for this report are on the supplementary agenda, and as Keith has set out. So can we agree the recommendations on the supplementary?
Can we also add in that recommendation 3 as well, so that should the NHS come to us tomorrow and say they want to use part of the Civic Centre, that I have permission from the Cabinet to enter into a licence for part of the Civic Centre or any other council property they might need.
Yes, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
That leaves us to say thank you to everyone for staying on the call, the meeting tonight. It has been a very long few months, really, and I think, as Christine said, people are putting in 7 days a week here to try and get things through, and we just still have to go through statutory business, like what we've had on the agenda tonight, as a responsibility we have as councillors to agree a number of budgets and draft budgets. So I'd like to extend my thanks to all the staff who've been working that hard through, not just through the pandemic, even like tonight, being here, knowing that I'm on calls with them first thing, and some of them first thing in the morning. And we've got to get things signed off by 10 o'clock tomorrow. So it is a very hard time to go through. I would go through to the opening point right at the beginning. The community of Harrow has come together very well during the pandemic. I think it's been exceptional and well noted. But what we need to also consider is that with the exponential rise in the virus pandemic, it looks like Christmas for quite a few people is a sort of diminishing sort of expectation. with the responsibility to trying to support number of residents we have. And this is ones we're aware of, and trying to run these helplines and call centres at the same time is exceptionally hard. So pulling people in out of other services is going to weaken those other services. But our priority, the priority to me is those with P1, which is a priority of life, to make sure that people aren't sort of left isolated and on their own. And hopefully we can pick those people up. So, Sean, if you could pass those thanks on to the staff. It has been a long meeting tonight, and I think I'll now go and respond to the emails that was mentioned earlier in some of the questions that were raised. So thank you very much and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I'll keep people informed over Christmas, Graham, if there's any significant developments through COVID.
Yes, it looks like we might have a conference call on Boxing Day, I think he said.
Okay.
Thank you. Andre, have we stopped recording now?
It's stopped now.